What drives a respected high-society philanthropist to commit a brutal murder? How can a seemingly perfect family hide secrets so dark that, when they come to light, they shake the foundations of the New York elite? This is the story of a crime that defies all logic, where love becomes obsession and jealousy unleashes a storm of fatal consequences. Prepare to enter a world of luxury, passion, and betrayal, where nothing is as it seems and where the killer could be the person you least expect. On the night of October 23, 2019, the exclusive Upper East Side neighborhood of New York witnessed a crime that would soon capture the attention of the entire world. In a luxurious penthouse with a panoramic view of Central Park, valued at more than $20 million, the silence of the night was torn by a scream that chilled the blood of the few who heard it. It was 10:47 at night when the 911 operator received the first call. The trembling voice on the other end of the line belonged to Margaret Holloway, a downstairs neighbor who, accustomed to the almost sepulchral quiet of the building, was alarmed to hear what she described as a scream of pure terror, followed by a dull thud. Just 7 minutes later, 2 NYPD patrol cars arrived at the luxurious building on Park Avenue. Officers Jason Ramirez and Sarah Chun were the first to enter the marble lobby, where a pale-looking concierge quickly guided them to the private elevator that led to the penthouse. Upon arriving at apartment 301, the officers found a door ajar. Instinct made them draw their weapons as they cautiously ventured inside. What they found there would leave them scarred for life. In the center of the very large living room, surrounded by works of modern art and designer furniture, lay the lifeless body of a young woman. Her blonde hair, now dyed red, spread like a macabre halo over the immaculate white marble floor. Beside him, on her knees and with bloody hands, was an older woman, sobbing uncontrollably. Officer Chun to Central. The police transmitted in a tense voice. "We need backup and a medical unit on Park Avenue 4200. We have a confirmed 1054. I repeat, confirmed homicide." The kneeling woman looked up, her blue eyes filled with tears contrasting dramatically with the blood stains on her face and on her expensive Chanel dress. "Help her, please," he pleaded in a broken voice. "My daughter-in-law. Someone has killed her." Those words would mark the beginning of one of the most intriguing and media cases in the recent history of New York. The victim was identified as Sophia Brennan, a brilliant 28-year-old lawyer, known in legal circles for her sharp intelligence and dazzling beauty. The older woman turned out to be 62-year-old Evelyn Hartley, a prominent figure in New York high society, known for her generous donations to charitable causes and her impeccable reputation. Detective Jack Morrison, a homicide veteran with 20 years of experience on the streets of New York, arrived at the crime scene an hour later. Upon entering the apartment, his experienced gaze immediately caught details that others might have missed. There were no signs of forced entry, valuables remained intact, and the position of the body suggested the victim knew her attacker. But it was the look in Evelyn Hartley's eyes that disturbed Morrison the most. Behind the tears and apparent shock, the detective perceived something else. A shadow, a fleeting glimpse of something that did not fit the image of the heartbroken mother-in-law. "Mrs. Hartley," Morrison began in a soft but firm voice, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened here tonight." Evelyn, still shaking, sobbed, recounted how she had arrived at the apartment for a surprise visit to her daughter-in-law. "The door was ajar," he said. "I walked in and found her like this. Oh my God, what am I going to tell my son?" As the investigation progressed over the next few hours, the forensic team worked meticulously, collecting evidence and photographing the scene. The murder weapon, a high-grade kitchen knife, was found under one of the sofas. There were no footprints on it. Dr. Ramesh Patel, chief medical examiner, conducted a preliminary examination of the body. "The victim has multiple stab wounds," he reported. "The probable cause of death is a deep wound in the neck that severed the carotid artery. Based on the body temperature and the degree of rigor mortis, I estimate that death occurred between 9 and 10 at night." Meanwhile, Detective Morrison began to pull the thread of Sophia Brennan's life. An honors graduate of Harvard Law School, Sophia had risen quickly at one of the most prestigious law firms on Wall Street. She had married just 2 years earlier, Thomas Hartley, Evelyn's only son and heir to a considerable family fortune. They were the perfect couple, said Caroline Foster, Sophia's best friend and co-worker, through tears. Always smiling, always happy. I can't believe this happened. However, as Morrison delved deeper into the investigation, cracks began to appear in the facade of perfection. Interviews with colleagues and friends revealed hidden tensions in Sophia and Thomas's marriage, rumors of infidelity, arguments behind closed doors, and a growing distance between the couple. Sophia had changed in recent months, revealed Mark Jenkins, an associate at the firm. She seemed distracted, sometimes absent. There were days when she was late for work, which was unusual for her. The next piece of the puzzle came in the form of phone and financial records. Morrison discovered a series of calls and text messages between Sophia and an unknown number. Communications intensified in the days before Thomas's business trips and coincided with reservations at luxury hotels in cities such as Paris, Tokyo, and Rio de Janeiro. I need you to trace this number, Morrison ordered his team. And I want to know everything about those trips. Who paid? Who else was there? Everything. The answer came 24 hours later, and it was like a bomb that threatened to blow up the foundations of the Hartley family. The mysterious number belonged to Robert Hartley, Thomas's stepfather and Evelyn's husband. Robert Hartley, a 58-year-old businessman known for his charisma and success in the world of finance, had entered the Hartleys' lives 15 years earlier, when he married Evelyn after the death of Thomas's father. He had always maintained a cordial but distant relationship with his stepson, and now it seemed that his bond with Sophia went far beyond what anyone had imagined. Morrison called a special team to fully investigate the relationship between Sophia and Robert. What they discovered was a passionate affair that had been developing over the past 3 months. Hotel searches, photographs from security cameras, and even witnesses in several cities around the world confirmed that the young lawyer and the experienced businessman had been leading a double life. An image captured by a security camera in the lobby of a hotel in Dubai became irrefutable proof. In it, Sophia and Robert were seen kissing passionately, oblivious to the world around them and the emotional tornado that their actions would unleash. With this new information, Morrison questioned Evelyn Hartley again. The woman, who until then had maintained the composure of a disgraced society lady, began to show signs of nervousness. Mrs. Hartley, Morrison began, his voice calm but charged with intent. When did you find out about the affair between your husband and your daughter-in-law? Evelyn's face paled. His hands, which until then had remained still in his lap, began to tremble visibly. I don't know what you're talking about, he replied, his voice breaking. That's impossible. Morrison placed the photographs of Sophia and Robert together on the table. Evelyn's eyes locked on the images, and for a moment, the detective saw something that made his blood run cold. A mix of pain, rage, and something darker, almost primal. Evelyn, Morrison insisted, we know you discovered the affair weeks before the murder. What really happened the night Sophia died? The silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn Hartley, the woman who for decades had been the epitome of grace and composure, began to crumble before the detective's eyes. She ruined everything, he finally whispered, his voice devoid of all emotion. My marriage, my family, my reputation, everything I had worked for years. What followed was a confession that stunned even the most seasoned investigators. Evelyn recounted how, consumed by jealousy and rage, she had meticulously planned Sophia's murder. Using his connections in New York's criminal underworld, he had hired a security systems expert to teach him how to defeat the building's cameras and sensors. The night of the crime, knowing that her son Thomas would be away on a business trip, Evelyn executed her plan. Dressed all in black and wearing latex gloves, she slipped into the couple's apartment. Sophia, surprised by her mother-in-law's presence, had no time to react when Evelyn pulled a knife from her purse and repeatedly plunged it into her body. He didn't say anything, Evelyn recalled, her voice now cold and distant. He just looked at me with those eyes, those eyes that had seduced my husband, and then they just went out. Evelyn Hartley's confession shook the foundations of New York high society. The news spread like wildfire, occupying the front pages of the newspapers and dominating the news for weeks. The killer mother-in-law case, as the media dubbed it, became the topic of conversation around the world, from the cafes of Paris to the bars of Tokyo. The trial, which began 6 months after the crime, was an unprecedented media circus. The Manhattan courthouse was surrounded every day by a crowd of reporters, onlookers, and followers of the case, hoping to catch a glimpse of the protagonist of this real-life drama. Evelyn Hartley, once the image of sophistication, appeared in court dressed in a sober gray suit, her face a mask of resignation. His lawyer, renowned criminal defense attorney Alan Dershowitz, argued that his client had acted in a state of temporary mental alienation, driven by the pain of betrayal and the collapse of his world. The prosecution, for its part, painted a devastating portrait of Evelyn as a calculating and vengeful woman who had coldly planned the murder of her daughter-in-law to preserve her social status and punish her husband's infidelity. The most shocking testimony came from Robert Hartley, the man at the center of the love triangle that had triggered the tragedy. Pale and visibly devastated, Robert described his relationship with Sophia as a catastrophic mistake born of loneliness and dissatisfaction. "I loved Evelyn," he declared through tears. "But with Sophia, it was like I felt alive again. I never imagined it would end like this." Thomas Hartley, Evelyn's son and Sophia's widower, remained noticeably absent throughout the proceedings. Sources close to the family revealed that the young heir had fallen into a deep depression, unable to reconcile his wife's betrayal with his mother's monstrous act. As the trial progressed, more details about the Hartley family's double life came to light. It was revealed that Evelyn, behind her facade as a respectable philanthropist, had been battling a secret gambling addiction, racking up significant debts at the most exclusive casinos in Las Vegas and Monaco. The defense attempted to use this information to reinforce the idea of a woman on the brink of collapse, pushed by circumstances to the breaking point. However, the forensic evidence and the meticulous planning of the crime weighed more in the scales of justice. After 3 weeks of heartbreaking testimony and shocking revelations, the jury retired to deliberate. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the hours passed. Finally, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Judge Eleanor Simmons, a 70-year-old woman known for her firmness and impartiality, called for silence in the courtroom before the jury foreman stood up. In the case of the state of New York against Evelyn Hartley on the charge of murder in the first degree, the jury finds the defendant guilty. A murmur ran through the room as Evelyn Hartley remained impassive, her gaze fixed on an invisible point beyond the platform. Judge Simmons then proceeded to hand down the sentence. "Evelyn Hartley, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. May God have mercy on your soul." As the bailiffs approached to take Evelyn away, she asked to make one last statement. The judge, after a moment of hesitation, agreed. Evelyn stood up, her once imposing figure now looking frail and aged. With a clear, firm voice, he looked directly into the cameras broadcasting the trial live to millions of viewers around the world. "Love and jealousy are two sides of the same coin," he began. "Both can drive you crazy. I thought I had lost everything, but I was wrong. Now, I really have lost everything." With these words, Evelyn Hartley was escorted from the room, leaving behind a legacy of destruction and a series of shattered lives. The killer mother-in-law case had repercussions that extended far beyond the courtroom. Robert Hartley, unable to bear the blame and public scrutiny, committed suicide just a week after the verdict. He was found in his Wall Street office with a suicide note that simply said, "I'm sorry for everything." Thomas Hartley, Evelyn's son and Sophia's widower, disappeared from public life after the trial. Close sources claimed that he had sold all his property in New York and retired to a Buddhist monastery in Tibet, seeking to find peace and meaning amid the chaos that had consumed his life. The impact of the case on New York high society was profound and lasting. Decades-long friendships were broken, Families were divided, and confidence in carefully cultivated appearances faded. The Hartley scandal became a grim reminder that even in the highest and seemingly perfect circles, the darkest instincts of human nature can lurk. 5 years after the crime, the luxurious penthouse overlooking Central Park, where the murder occurred, remains empty, despite its privileged location and its million-dollar value. No buyer has dared to purchase it. It has become a kind of unofficial monument to tragedy, a silent reminder of how love, passion, and jealousy can converge into a lethal cocktail. Detective Jack Morrison, who led the investigation, retired a year after closing the Hartley case. In an exclusive interview for this documentary, he reflected on the impact it had on his career and his worldview. "In my 20 years as a homicide detective, I have never seen a case that affected me so much," Morrison confessed. "It makes you question everything you think you know about human nature. It reminds us that sometimes monsters don't hide in the shadows, but in plain sight, in the most respectable and bright places in society." The Hartley case also sparked a national debate about mental health and the stigma associated with seeking psychological help, especially in elite circles. Several psychologists and family relationship experts pointed out how the pressure to maintain a perfect image can drive people to unimaginable extremes. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a forensic psychologist who worked as a consultant on the case, offered her perspective. "What we see in the Hartley case is an extreme example of what can happen when repressed emotions and family secrets explode. It is a reminder of the importance of open and honest communication in relationships and seeking professional help when situations become overwhelming." In an ironic twist of fate, the Hartley tragedy inspired a series of reforms to New York laws related to domestic violence and crimes of passion. Sophia's Law, named in honor of the victim, established harsher penalties for murders acting out of jealousy or revenge, and expanded the resources available to victims of emotional abuse. Meanwhile, at Bedford Hill's maximum security prison, Evelyn Hartley has become a model inmate. According to prison reports, he spends his days in the prison library, reading extensively about psychology and philosophy. He has declined all interview requests and, according to his lawyer, is writing his memoirs, although they are unlikely to be published. The law firm where Sophia Brennan worked established a scholarship in her name, intended for law students specializing in domestic violence cases and victim advocacy. Every year, dozens of young lawyers inspired by Sophia's story work to bring justice and prevent future tragedies. As for the Hartley fortune, much of it was donated to charity by Thomas's decision before his disappearance. The rest remains in a trust whose final fate is still uncertain. The case of the killer mother-in-law continues to fascinate the public years later. It has been the subject of countless books, television shows, and even a Broadway play. Each new interpretation attempts to unravel the fundamental mystery. How could a respected and admired woman be transformed into a ruthless killer? Perhaps the most important lesson this tragedy leaves us with is that appearances can be deceptive, and that even the most seemingly perfect families can hide dark secrets and destructive passions. It reminds us that love, taken to the extreme, can become its most terrible opposite. As the sun sets over Central Park, casting long shadows over the building where the crime occurred, one cannot help but reflect on the fragility of life and human relationships. The Hartley case will forever remain a grim reminder of how love, jealousy, and betrayal can converge in a perfect storm of tragedy. On the streets of New York, life goes on. Passers-by pass by the building without knowing the dark history hidden behind its elegant facades. But for those who know the truth, that empty attic overlooking the park will always be a silent monument to human passions taken to the extreme and to the devastating consequences that our actions can have. As we close this chapter of the Hartley story, we are left with more questions than answers. What drives a person to cross the line between love and hate? How can we protect ourselves from our own darkest impulses? And perhaps most importantly, how can we learn from this tragedy to build healthier, more authentic relationships? The case of Evelyn Hartley reminds us that sometimes reality can be stranger and more terrible than fiction. It urges us to look beyond carefully constructed facades and recognize the humanity, with all its complexities and contradictions, in those around us. As the world continues to spin and new scandals capture the public's attention, the legacy of the Hartley case endures. It leaves us with a grim warning about the dangers of obsessive love and uncontrolled jealousy, and reminds us that even in the highest circles of society, the most basic human passions can lead to devastating consequences. And so, with the curtain falling on this dark chapter in New York's history, we are left to hope that valuable lessons may emerge from this tragedy. Lessons about the importance of honesty in our relationships, about the need to seek help when we feel overwhelmed by our emotions, and about the destructive power of secrets and lies. The case of the killer mother-in-law will remain engraved in the collective memory as a reminder that love, that force that elevates us to the most sublime heights of the human spirit, can also, if twisted and poisoned, take us to the abysses, deepest of depravity. As the city lights flicker in the New York night, illuminating the dark windows of that empty attic, we can't help but wonder, what secrets, what passions, what dramas are unfolding right now behind the seemingly perfect facades of the buildings that surround us? And more importantly, what can we do to ensure that our own stories have a different ending than the Hartleys? With these questions ringing in our minds, the Hartley case continues to be the subject of study and debate in academic, legal, and psychological circles. The complexity of human emotions and family dynamics that led to this tragedy have inspired numerous investigations and publications. Dr. Amelia Sanchez, a renowned psychologist specializing in family relationships, published an extensive study on the case titled The Hartley Effect: When Love Becomes Obsession. In her work, Dr. Sanchez explores the psychological factors that can lead a seemingly normal person to commit acts of extreme violence. The Hartley case shows us how love, when mixed with deeply rooted insecurities and a pathological need for control, can become a destructive force, explains Dr. Sanchez. It's a reminder of the importance of mental health and how unresolved issues can escalate to tragic proportions. The case's impact on popular culture has been equally profound. In addition to books and television shows, the Hartley case has inspired a number of films and plays. The film Jealousy on Park Avenue, starring Meryl Streep as Evelyn Hartley, received critical acclaim and several Academy Awards, reviving public interest in the case nearly a decade after the events. On Broadway, the musical Hartley, an American tragedy, became a box office hit, exploring events from multiple perspectives and using music to convey the emotional complexity of the characters. The production won several Tony Awards and has been adapted in numerous countries, bringing the Hartley story to audiences around the world. The case has also had a lasting impact on the legal system. The Sophia Law, mentioned above, has been adopted in several states, creating a precedent for stricter legislation in cases of crimes of passion. Furthermore, it has led to greater awareness of the need for prevention and early intervention programs in situations of emotional abuse and psychological manipulation. In the realm of philanthropy, the Hartley scandal prompted closer scrutiny of charities and their major donors. Many foundations and nonprofit organizations implemented more rigorous verification processes for their benefactors, seeking to avoid associations with individuals or families that could damage their reputations. The business world was also affected. The collapse of Robert Hartley's financial empire, following his suicide, led to a series of investigations into ethical business practices and the importance of transparency in corporate upper echelons. Several companies implemented stricter policies on personal relationships in the workplace, citing the Hartley case as an example of how personal issues can have catastrophic professional consequences. In the field of criminology, the Hartley case has become required study for students. Evelyn's meticulous planning of the crime, her initial attempt at a cover-up, and her eventual confession offer a unique window into the mind of a murderess who doesn't fit typical profiles. Criminologist Dr. James Patterson, in his book Murder Minds of High Society, devotes an entire chapter to the Hartley case. What makes this case so fascinating from a criminological perspective, Patterson writes, is how Evelyn Hartley managed to maintain a facade of normality and even virtue for so long. Her ability to compartmentalize her life, to simultaneously be a philanthropist respected and a calculating killer, challenges many of our assumptions about criminal behavior. The impact of the case on the Upper East Side community, where the Hartleys lived, was particularly profound. What was once considered a bastion of privilege and refinement was mired in a climate of suspicion and mistrust. Neighbors who once boasted of knowing the lovely Evelyn Hartley found themselves questioning how much they really knew about the people around them. This change in social dynamics led to the creation of several community programs in the area, designed to foster more authentic connections between residents and promote awareness of mental health and emotional well-being. The Connection Project, started by a group of residents of the building where the crime occurred, has expanded to other neighborhoods in New York, organizing events and workshops that encourage people to look beyond appearances and form genuine connections with their communities. In the realm of fashion and lifestyle, the Hartley case sparked a backlash against the culture of perfection and appearances that had dominated certain social circles. Designers and luxury brands began to adopt more authentic narratives and campaigns that celebrated human imperfection and vulnerability. The phrase, the Hartley effect, was coined in the industry to describe this move away from the polished, perfect image that had been the hallmark of high society. The case also had repercussions in the art world. Several contemporary artists created works inspired by the Hartley tragedy, exploring themes of duality, deception, and the fragility of social constructs. Artist Marina Abramovic's installation, Fragments of a Perfect Life, which featured a recreation of the Hartley's attic made entirely of broken glass, became one of the most talked about and controversial pieces of the Venice Biennale. In the technology field, the Hartley case inspired the development of apps and platforms designed to promote open and honest communication in relationships. The True Heart app, which encourages couples to share their thoughts and feelings in a regular and structured way, cites the Hartley case in its founding manifesto as an example of the tragic consequences that can result from a lack of genuine communication. The impact of the case on the legal community was equally significant. Evelyn Hartley's defense, based on the allegation of temporary insanity, led to renewed debate over the legal definition of sanity and criminal responsibility. Several states revised their laws on the insanity defense, seeking a balance between understanding psychological factors and the need for justice for victims. In law schools, the Hartley case became required study, not only because of its legal implications, but also because of the ethical questions it raised. How to balance a lawyer's duty to defend his client with the moral responsibility toward truth and justice. These questions continue to challenge future lawyers and judges, shaping the next generation of legal professionals. The media impact of the case also led to a reflection on the ethics of journalism and the coverage of sensational crimes. The intense media attention that the Hartley case received, with reporters camping outside the courthouse and chasing relatives and acquaintances in search of exclusives, provoked criticism about the exploitation of other people's pain for the sake of ratings. As a result, several news organizations reviewed their policies on coverage of criminal cases, seeking a balance between the public's right to information and respect for the privacy and dignity of victims and their families. The Hartley Code, a set of ethical guidelines for the coverage of violent crimes, was adopted by numerous media outlets across the country. In the area of mental health, the Hartley case highlighted the importance of addressing emotional and psychological problems proactively. Many experts noted that if Evelyn had sought professional help to deal with her jealousy and insecurities, the tragedy could have been avoided. This realization led to an increase in public awareness about the importance of mental health care and therapy. Several celebrities and public figures, inspired by the case, began speaking openly about their own struggles with mental health, helping to reduce the stigma associated with seeking psychological help. The Hartley case also had an impact on the way society views aging and intergenerational relationships. The dynamic between Evelyn, Robert, and Sophia raised uncomfortable questions about age stereotypes and coming-of-age sexuality. Several sociological studies explored how social perceptions about love and attraction at different stages of life can lead to intergenerational tensions and conflicts. In academia, the Hartley case became a focal point for interdisciplinary research. Psychologists, sociologists, criminologists, and ethicists collaborated on studies that examined the complexities of the case from multiple angles. Columbia University's Hartley Project, a longitudinal study of the long-term effects of the case on New York society, has produced dozens of scholarly articles and continues to shed light on the social reverberations of high-profile crimes. The impact of the case on social media culture was also significant. The Hartley's tragedy became a grim reminder of the difference between the image we project online and the reality of our lives. Many social media users, reflecting on the case, began to question the authenticity of the perfect lives they saw on their feeds, leading to a movement toward greater honesty and vulnerability on digital platforms. In the field of education, the Hartley case inspired the creation of curricula on emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. Several high schools and universities introduced courses that used the case as a starting point for discussions about ethics, communication, and the importance of addressing emotional problems in a healthy way. The case also had a lasting impact on the private security and surveillance industry. The ease with which Evelyn Hartley was able to bypass the building's security systems led to a review of security protocols in luxury buildings across the country. New facial recognition technologies and more sophisticated security systems were developed in direct response to the lessons learned from the Hartley case. In the world of literature, the case inspired a wave of psychological suspense novels that explored themes of deception, jealousy, and the darkness hidden behind facades of social perfection. Best-selling author Gillian Flynn's novel, The Perfect Smile, although fictional, was widely recognized as an exploration of the central themes of the Hartley case. The impact of the case on New York's tourism industry was unexpected but significant. The building where the crime occurred became an unofficial stop on dark New York tours, attracting tourists fascinated by the city's macabre history. This led to ethical debates about the commercialization of tragedy and the limits of true crime tourism. In fashion, the Evelyn Hartley style. Elegant designer suits and understated but expensive jewelry experienced an ironic resurgence. Fashion designers created collections inspired by the high society aesthetic of the 2010s, but with a subversive twist that commented on duality and deception. The Hartley case also had an impact on the way society views marriage and long-term relationships. Marriage therapists reported an increase in consultations from couples concerned about trust and communication issues, directly citing the Hartley case as a catalyst for seeking help. In the world of sports, surprisingly, the case had repercussions. Several elite athletes, inspired by the tragedy, began to speak openly about the pressure of maintaining a perfect public image and the importance of mental health in high-performance sport. The case also inspired changes in architecture and interior design. The concept of honest spaces gained popularity, promoting designs that encourage openness and transparency in the home as a metaphor for healthier, more authentic relationships. In the field of artificial intelligence and data science, the Hartley case became a fascinating case study. Researchers developed algorithms designed to detect patterns of behavior that could indicate emotional stress or hidden violent tendencies. Although these efforts raise important ethical questions about privacy and surveillance, the impact of the case on the film and television industry was profound and lasting. In addition to direct adaptations of the Hartley story, an entire subgenre of psychological thrillers emerged that explored themes of deception and appearances in high society. The television series Masks of Manhattan, although not directly based on the Hartley case, was widely recognized as a fictional exploration of the themes and dynamics that the case had brought to the public consciousness. In the field of forensic psychology, the Hartley case became a reference point for the study of murders who do not fit typical profiles. Evelyn Hartley's apparent normality before the crime and her ability to maintain a facade of composure even afterward challenged many existing assumptions about criminal behavior. Dr. Marcus Whitman, renowned forensic psychologist, dedicated several years to studying the Hartley case. In his book Beyond Appearances, The Psychology of the Hartley Affair, Whitman explores how social, cultural, and psychological factors intertwined to create the conditions that led to this tragedy. What makes the Hartley case so fascinating and disturbing, Whitman writes, is how it challenges our preconceived notions about who can become a murderer. Evelyn Hartley was not a social outcast. She had no history of violence. She showed no of the classic signs we associate with serial killers or violent criminals. He was, by all appearances, a respected and admired member of high society. His case forces us to reconsider our assumptions about the nature of evil and the human capacity for it. Violence. The impact of the case on the medical community was also significant. Doctors, especially those working in mental health, began to pay more attention to subtle signs of emotional distress in patients who, on the surface, seemed to have perfect lives. The Hartley Protocol was developed as a guide for healthcare professionals, emphasizing the importance of looking beyond appearances and addressing emotional concerns proactively. In the realm of sociology, the Hartley case sparked renewed interest in the study of power dynamics within wealthy families. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a sociologist at Columbia University, led a 5-year study of the impact of the case on upper-class families in New York. What we found, explains Rodriguez, was a significant change in how these families approach internal conflicts. There was a movement toward greater openness and honesty, a desire to address problems rather than hide them behind a facade of perfection. In some sense, the Hartley case acted as a catalyst for broader cultural change in these social circles. The case also had a lasting impact on the self-help and personal development industry. Books like Beyond Appearances, Lessons from the Hartley Case became bestsellers, offering advice on how to cultivate authentic relationships and manage difficult emotions like jealousy and insecurity. In the art world, the legacy of the Hartley case continued to inspire works that explored themes of duality and deception. The Fractures exhibition, which opened at the Museum of Modern Art in New York on the 10th anniversary of the crime, featured works by various artists reflecting on the case's lasting impact on the city's collective psyche. One of the most striking pieces in the exhibition was The Broken Mirror by conceptual artist Sarah Chen. The installation consisted of a series of fragmented mirrors that, when viewed from a certain angle, formed the face of Evelyn Hartley. The work was praised for its powerful depiction of the fragmentation of identity and the illusion of perfection. In the realm of higher education, the Hartley case became a topic of interdisciplinary study. Universities such as Harvard and Stanford developed courses that examine the case from legal, psychological, sociological, and ethical perspectives. These courses attracted not only law and psychology students, but also future journalists, filmmakers, and writers, all eager to understand the complexities of the case and its broader implications. The impact on popular culture continued long after the initial headlines faded. In addition to the films and television series directly inspired by the case, an entire subgenre of psychological thrillers emerged that explored similar themes. Films like Park Avenue Secrets and The Perfect Smile became box office hits, each offering their own interpretation of the events that led to Evelyn Hartley's crime. In the fashion world, the Hartley style experienced an ironic revival. High-profile designers created collections inspired by Evelyn Hartley's elegant and refined aesthetic, but with a subversive twist. Impeccable pantsuits were paired with accessories that suggested fractures or hidden imperfections, a visual commentary on the duality that the case had brought to the public consciousness. The case also had a lasting impact on the world of philanthropy. Many charities, aware of how Evelyn Hartley's reputation had initially obscured her actions, implemented more rigorous vetting processes for their donors and board members. The Hartley Transparency Index was established as an industry standard, measuring the level of openness and accountability of nonprofit organizations. In the technology space, the Hartley case inspired the development of apps and platforms designed to promote open and honest communication in relationships. The True Heart app, which encourages couples to share their thoughts and feelings in a regular and structured way, cites the Hartley case in its founding manifesto as an example of the tragic consequences that can result from a lack of genuine communication. The impact of the case on the legal community was equally profound and lasting. Evelyn Hartley's defense, based on the allegation of temporary insanity, led to renewed debate over the legal definition of sanity and criminal responsibility. Several states revised their laws on the insanity defense, seeking a balance between understanding psychological factors and the need for justice for victims. In law schools, the Hartley case became required study, not only because of its legal implications, but also because of the ethical questions it raised. How to balance a lawyer's duty to defend his client with the moral responsibility toward truth and justice. These questions continue to challenge future lawyers and judges, shaping the next generation of legal professionals. As the years go by, the Hartley case continues to be a subject of fascination and study. Each new anniversary of the crime brings with it a wave of retrospective articles, documentaries, and public debates. The story of Evelyn Hartley, Sophia Brennan, and the family they destroyed has become an indelible part of New York urban mythology, a cautionary tale about the dangers of appearances and the destructive power of jealousy and obsession. Meanwhile, at Bedford Hills Prison, Evelyn Hartley continues to serve her life sentence. He reportedly spends his days in the prison library, studying psychology and philosophy. He has declined all interview requests and, according to his lawyer, is writing his memoirs, although they are unlikely to be published. The attic where the crime occurred remains empty, a silent reminder of the tragedy that took place within its walls. Despite its prime location and real estate value, no buyer has been willing to purchase the property. It has become something of an unofficial monument, a place of pilgrimage for those fascinated by the case. Thomas Hartley, Evelyn's son and Sophia's widower, never returned to public life. Rumors about his whereabouts continue to circulate, with unconfirmed sightings in places as diverse as a monastery in Tibet and a small island in the Caribbean. Her persistent silence has only added another layer of mystery to her family's already complex story. As we reflect on the Hartley case and its lasting impact, we are left with more questions than answers. What does it tell us about human nature and our capacity for love and hate, compassion and cruelty? How can we reconcile a person's public image with their private actions? And perhaps most importantly, what can we learn from this tragedy to prevent something similar from happening in the future? The Hartley case reminds us that even in the highest circles of society, where wealth and privilege can create an illusion of perfection, the most basic human passions can lead to devastating consequences. It urges us to look beyond carefully constructed facades and recognize the humanity, with all its complexities and contradictions, in those around us. As the sun sets over Central Park, casting long shadows over the building where the crime occurred, one cannot help but reflect on the fragility of life and human relationships. The Hartley case will forever remain a grim reminder of how love, jealousy, and betrayal can converge in a perfect storm of tragedy. On the streets of New York, life goes on. Passers-by pass by the building without knowing the dark history hidden behind its elegant facades. But for those who know the truth, that empty attic overlooking the park will always be a silent monument to human passions taken to the extreme and to the devastating consequences that our actions can have. The case of the killer mother-in-law leaves us with a lingering warning about the dangers of deceptive appearances and the importance of honesty in our relationships. It reminds us that sometimes reality can be stranger and more terrible than any fiction, and that the most powerful stories are not always found in the pages of a novel, but in the seemingly perfect lives of those around us. As we close this chapter of the Hartley story, we can't help but wonder, what secrets, what passions, what dramas are unfolding right now behind the seemingly perfect facades of the buildings around us? And more importantly, what can we do to ensure that our own stories have a different ending than the Hartleys? With these questions echoing in our minds, the Hartley case fades into history, but its legacy lives on, an eternal reminder of the complexity of the human heart and the tragic consequences that can arise when love twists into something darker and more dangerous.